those of you watching live and those who are watching this recording in the future. This is about how to film an interview. And I will be going over a number of different techniques to help you with your interviews, help you with interview audio, camera setup, and if we have time, some other aspects of interviews, some little tips to help you out. I'm Ben Willis. I've been making documentaries specifically with high school students as part of project-based learning activities for, believe it or not, 12 years now, I think. Made something like over 80 short films with students in all kinds of environments, all kinds of ways, summer programs. I've been a full-time teacher, and we do great stuff like this now these days, a lot of really this workshop is going to be loaded with information and tips. So I strongly suggest taking notes. If you're watching the recording of this, just be ready to pause. If you hear something interesting, write it down. I will definitely go back at the end and talk about specific things that I mentioned throughout this workshop. So you may hear me go through some things really quickly. I'll circle back at the end and highlight what some of the key ideas are. So let's just get underway because we have a lot to talk about. So first up is the basics of an interview, right? When you show up, let's imagine you have secured an interview. You found some really awesome journalist who covered the exact issue that you're interested in, and you're going to meet them. You're meeting them in their office, and you're gonna go in there. You're going there with a few students and a teacher, and you're heading in. It's awesome. You're excited. So what do? Right? How do we even go in? How do we even enter this situation? The first step, the first thing to think about when you walk in is that you're going on a tech scout. So we call it a tech scout, is a technical scout, right? It's when you go to a location that you're planning on using, but you are going to sort of evaluate it to figure out what's the best way to use this place I'm in. Because this is what happens. You arrive somewhere, you got your camera gear, you got your crew, and you suddenly get the person goes, hey, welcome, come on in. Where do you want to shoot? They open up a conference room. They say we could shoot down the hall. They say we could shoot outside in the lawn behind here. What do you want to do? And you're kind of overwhelmed. Oh my God, where do I start? What do I do? So to begin with, when we walk into somewhere, think about if you're shooting with multiple people, right? If you have maybe an interviewer, a producer, and you have a camera operator, immediately when you go in, you're kind of splitting your roles. So the producer, the interviewer, their job as you go into an interview is really to talk to the person being interviewed. It's really important at the very beginning that they establish a rapport with that person. A good interview in a documentary is built on trust. You want these people to know, whoever you're interviewing, to know that you're a good listener, that you care about what they have to say, that you're interested in them. This is how you end up getting surprised in interviews and getting great information that you may have not expected and may have not been part of your list of questions. So the first thing is your producer's going in, your camera crew, of course, is going in thinking about something completely different, right? As a camera crew, we're thinking about, and it might just be one person, a lot of times it's just me, camera operator. I'm thinking about, where am I going to shoot? Where's the best place going to be to get the best looking interview? So this is how I begin. I usually like to not go in with all my gear loaded up. I find that sometimes, especially if someone is someone who hasn't appeared a lot in documentaries or on the news, not like a journalist, but someone who hasn't done a lot of stuff, they might get a little intimidated. And this is especially true if it's someone that you worked really hard to get an interview with. You don't want to overwhelm them. We've definitely interviewed people who had been through some really difficult traumas in their life, had some really amazing stories to tell, were great advocates for issues, but we didn't want to just storm into their home or their office with tons of gear and start throwing it down everywhere, right? So this is what you do. Producer walks in, producer says hi, shakes this person's hand. Camera crew, don't go in with all your gear. Open palms, really great. Shake that person's hand, greet them, talk to them. Once the producer and the crew, and you've all met this person you're being interviewed, and the producer starts talking to them, the first thing you want to do as a camera operator who's about to conduct an interview is ask, where can I bring stuff in? I know it sounds really simple, really obvious, but where can I put stuff? And this is also true if someone was coming to your school to film, right? The first place you want to find is a place what we call to load in. That's the very first thing we want to figure out. Where can we load in our gear? It seems trivial, but this actually has an impact on getting a good interview, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to be professional, and we're trying to not be disruptive to that person's space, especially if it's their home or their workplace, right? So it's really good to ask, hey, where can we load in? They say, oh yeah, dining room would be fine. You can put your stuff in there. You say, thanks, run out to your bus, to the van, to the car, and start grabbing gear and hauling it in and throwing it down in the dining room, right? So it's that really simple exchange right at the beginning. And we all know how first impressions have a big impact. So they'll know that you're professional. They start talking to your interviewer producer, they're connecting with them, and everything about this whole situation feels positive. This is all about interpersonal relationships right now, right? We're not even worried about the technical side yet. We're not even worried about what kind of questions we're going to be asking. We just want to make sure that there's trust there and that people believe, even though you're coming in, you might be a high school student or maybe you're college age, like that they treat you with respect, right? That you're coming in, you're an adult, and you're professional, right? So that's our first step. All right, so we've done that, and now the person has gone, okay, you can film in this conference room, you can film in the hallway, we've got lots of places to go. So how do we pick the best place to actually shoot our interview? And this is what I mean by the tech scout. We start having to make some technical decisions about where we're going to be filming. The first one is quiet, right? If I can find a space that is quiet, that doesn't have a lot of noise, that's really important. So when you find a spot and you think it could be a good one, a really good first step is, I always say, stop, listen, and look. Now, this could be, again, true if you're going to someone's office, you could be at school, you could be going into filming just in a classroom that you're in every single day, and it's never that loud. So you're not worried about it. You're like, there's not a lot of noise. I'm in here all day. It's boring. It's quiet. I hate the class I usually have in here. So you don't think it's very noisy, but you'd be surprised when you stop and you just have the whole crew just be quiet and just pause. Everyone stops talking, stops moving equipment, and just listen. You'll immediately start noticing things, I guarantee it, you never heard before. You'll hear a clicking and some duct overhead. You might hear central air on. You might notice a window open and trucks passing outside. All these things that your brain sort of just writes off are going to appear in your film and take away from the power of this interview you're going to shoot. The audio is so important to a good interview, because if the audio is bad, we really have nothing, because you can't have an interview that looks really nice and has great information, but it just sounds like this, and there's a hum in the background. It's no good. On the other hand, if we get really good audio in our interviews, but the other areas are lacking, we can work with that, right? If we've got great audio, we can go out, we can shoot on, the next workshop is on B-roll. We're going to shoot a ton of B-roll, right? We can cover up our interviews. That's fine if the interviews don't look great, but they need to sound good. That's very important. So the first thing in finding a space is I like to just listen. And if I hear that, there is maybe, usually it's in open windows, or a radiator, like a heater that's kicking on and off if you're filming in the wintertime. And a really good rule of thumb is just to ask the person who's there, someone who's showing you around the space, just be like, hey, can we turn that off? If it's someone's home, definitely possible. If it's a big office building, I've definitely filmed in office buildings where they said no. They're like, this is the air for the whole place. We can't turn the air off. So I'm clean up my monitor a little bit. There we go. So that's a big deal, right? If someone says like, hey, I can't do anything about this sound, then immediately all right, this space might not work for me. So audio is really important, something you always want to be aware of. And that's why I say stop, listen, and look. So stop, start listening, notice sounds, and then look around for the source of the sound, see what it might be, see if it's something you can control. And if not, maybe you want to choose another space. Another really good tip when you're picking a place to do your interview is pick somewhere. Oh, very loud siren going off in the background. Hold on. Speaking of audio. When we are filming in a location, we want to think about the size of the space. So a lot of times if we're going to someone's office, they'll offer like their office, like, oh, I could sit behind my desk. I could do my interview there. And I try to avoid that. It usually doesn't look great. And I just feel that when there's a desk between you and the person you're interviewing, it kind of feels like you're not coming to their office as like a visitor, as like a client, right? You're coming to do an interview. So I kind of want to not have a desk between me and the person I'm talking to. Again, it goes back to that theme of this being interpersonal. So we know what that means, right? It's about our connection between us just as people, right? And you want to connect, you want to be friendly. And so having like a desk in the way, they're behind their desk, they're always behind their desk in their office, they're the big boss. You want to put that aside and take all that away and just let that person be themselves. There's some situations where I don't do that. If it's like a public official who's, like we interviewed the governor one time, and if the governor wants to be behind his desk for an interview, then we let the governor be behind his desk. Part of that is just because like it's like you want your picture to kind of convey something about this person. And obviously the governor behind his big wooden desk with his office and the flags behind him, that might be kind of what you're going for your film. So you go with it. But in general, I want to get away from that. Offices can be small, they can be tight. The number one thing I look for when I do an interview is a room that's deep. So a room that's long. That's because I want to put my interview subject in the middle of a room. I want there to be a lot of depth behind them. You don't want to interview someone up against a wall like this. It looks like you've cornered them and they're frightened, right? If you move someone out into the middle of the room and there's much more space behind them, it sort of brightens up the whole interview. It lightens up the energy of this interview. And what the other effect that it has is that further away the background is, the more out of focus the background will get. So right now, this background's pretty close to me. I can reach it with my arm. So it's pretty much in focus. You can see the picture, you can see this mic, it's all in focus. We would really want for our interview, for interviewing me, to really get all of this background out of focus unless this microphone or this painting was saying something about me as an interviewer and you really wanted that in the shot. But looking for a space that has a little bit of room, right? You might want to bring lights in. So many times people will offer like a conference room, which is terrible because there's always a big table right in the middle. And more often than not, we kind of want to be right in the middle of a room, as I said. And so when there's a table right in the middle, it gets hard to work with. We've definitely done it. I mean, sometimes that's the best place. It's the quietest. It's the least likely to be where you're going to get disturbed. So that sometimes ends up what you're doing. When I'm shooting at school, I love going to the library, especially if it's a time when there's not a lot of students in the library, because libraries tend to be big. The sound tends to be muffled because you've got usually like a carpeted floor, you have lots of books, you have lots of couches and chairs. And so on like all the bookshelves, it kind of muffles the sound, keeps it from bouncing around the room. And I can find somewhere where there's a lot of depth behind the person and then just like an out of focus bookshelf way in the background, which I can use for an interview with pretty much anyone. Because I'm like, hey, look at books. They're smart. So that's always kind of a good one to use, like your school library, awesome place. Again, because it muffles sound, because of everything in it, and also you have a lot of space. Another thing about libraries that is great is that a lot of times they have a lot of light. At the school I used to teach at, we had the really big windows on one side of the library. So all this really nice, soft daylight would come in. So that was really nice. It made our interviews look really good. So that's something I think about is you want somewhere big, somewhere with a little bit more room, not somewhere echoey, not like a gymnasium, but look for somewhere big where you have enough space to move around with your camera to get someone away from the wall, away from being behind their desk, right? We want to get out somewhere kind of interesting. The next thing we do when we're on this little tech scout, so remember during this time, usually the producer is chatting up that person who's going to be interviewed, and you, the camera operator or your crew, you're walking around and you're investigating all this. This place be good? Is this room big enough for us? Is the sound okay in here? How's the light in here? Do we have some natural light? Oh, that's cool. The next thing we think about is like power, which is a simple one, but usually, especially if I'm doing an interview outside next to the building, that happens a lot. If we don't find a good enough space inside, if it's quiet outside, I might do my interview outside. And in that case, I start thinking about, like, am I going to need power? You're gonna need power maybe to plug in your camera, maybe you want to plug in lights, maybe you have sound equipment that needs some power. And it's always helpful. It's great to be able to plug in your camera or your equipment because then you can just turn everything on and don't have to worry about trying to conserve power during the course of your interview. And so that's sort of like a basic thing I'll think about for technical stuff is just like, hey, and again, usually if you're inside, if you're in a room, there's probably space, but you'd be surprised, you know, if you are in like an office environment or something like that, finding an available outlet you can plug into might be challenging. So it's always nice to ask, hey, is it okay if I plug in some equipment to that outlet over there? Really nice thing to ask. Again, shows you're professional, shows that you care about their space. And so that's going to help really helps you get a better interview later because you're building respect, you're building rapport there. The last thing, and I sort of touched on this when I talked about backgrounds, is thinking about what backgrounds are available for you to use when you're in a space. So again, when you go to like a school library, you're like, okay, I have lots of books I could have in the background. As filmmakers, we usually are thinking, can I have something in the background that says something about the person being interviewed, right? I'm interviewing a doctor. Maybe I want to have some diplomas on the wall behind them. A lot of times we end up having nothing to put back there. It's just a blank wall and someone moves like a house plant in. I hate that, but that's, but it's nice to see if there's something that says something about this person or about your documentary that can be in the background, not too close, not distracting, but if it's in the back and it's not too distracting, it can be really nice. And also if I can't do that, I just try and get my background to be as soft focused as possible. So I want my background to be as far away as possible so that it's not too sharp to in focus, and because then it gets distracts you from the focus, which should be on your interviewer. So that's it. It's like we've got it in there, right? We're chatting up the interview subject, and our camera crew is roaming the halls. They found a great space to film. They think it's perfect. They had a place to load in their gear. They've loaded their equipment in, and now we go, okay, what do we set up first? First thing you do, set up your tripod on your camera. I know you might have lights with you, you might have sound equipment with you, all kinds of different things. First thing we do, we set up our tripod, we set up our camera, because we're gonna wanna start figuring out if this is gonna look good at all. We wanna start getting an idea is this a good place to do our interview? So first tip here, use a stand-in. Right? So if you know what a stand-in is, it means you get someone from your crew. Hopefully you've got at least a second person with you. It's really cool. I know a guy who actually goes around with a mannequin, which is really weird. It's got a face, he's got a little hat on it, and he puts it in spots in front of his camera so he can be behind camera and adjust his shot. Strange. So it's nice if you have a friend to come with you. So the reason we use a stand-in is because you don't want to have the person you're about to interview sitting in that chair while you are testing lights, moving chairs around, setting up your camera, putting audio equipment, setting audio equipment up, doing all those things that we're going to get into when we're setting up an interview. You don't want to be doing that while your interviewer is sitting there, because it's, again, this goes back to this one theme you'll see me hitting over and over again. That can start getting into someone's head. They can get impatient. They can just get uncomfortable, right, sitting there. So it's much better if they are off with your producer or interviewer and they're just chatting about the documentary, chatting about different things, again, building that personal connection, and you have someone else from your crew sit in that chair while you interview them, right? Makes sense. Then again, we start thinking about like, all right, we set up our camera, we start thinking about our composition, right? What should our interview look like? Now, my tip for you is you can basically set up your camera angle, and most people disagree with me on this, but you can set it up in almost any angle, any place you want. Your camera could be tilted, it could be like this, it could be like that. That you could do whatever you want as long as it's consistent with every single interview you do, so that someone watching your film knows that you did that purposely. You don't want something to look like a mistake. So I'm going to show you some of the basics here that we're going to go for. The ideal, there's sort of two approaches here that you can do. You can do the wide lens. So this is a wide lens, we'd say, because it's zoomed out very far. It's kind of similar to if you were filming on your phone, center. right? So you can do an interview centered like this, having someone talk. Now, this kind of thing is great for like YouTube, right? If I'm doing a YouTube video, I want to be dead center. I have an equal amount of negative space on either side of me, and I'm talking right into the camera, right? And that can be really cool. It's very energetic. It's dynamic. I'm like, hey guys, don't forget to like and subscribe. Today we're going to be blah, 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 right? That can be a really cool way to try and, you're like visually trying to pull your audience in to your movie. But for an interview, that can be weird. Some people have done it. I know if you see like movies like The Thin Blue Line or The Fog of War, which are really awesome films, they use something like that where there's actually a screen here where the person being interviewed can see the person interviewing them. So they're looking right into the camera having the interview, which can create some powerful moments. But for your purposes, my suggestion is an asymmetrical composition. So you know what asymmetry means? Right now, this is symmetrical. It's right down, we can fold this right down the center. Besides the background, it'd be the same on either side. Asymmetry, we want to go over here a little bit. So the way I set up initially, which is there was purpose in that, right? So in an asymmetrical composition, I'm sitting here and I'm going to talk to my interviewer. It's going to be right over the camera here. So I am on the left side of the camera. For you, if you're filming, I'm on the right side. And your interview is always on the opposite side of the camera, because that creates this eye line where the person is looking into, see this negative space here? They're slightly turning towards this negative space and they're talking into it. So imagine if they had a speaking bubble, the speaking bubble would be going right into this space right here. So that's kind of what you want. You want them looking over here and they're talking. The speech bubble, like if it was a comic book, right? It's right here. You have space for that speech bubble. And they're looking right at your interviewer who's on the opposite side of the camera like that. Now, this is the best one. I just think this is the way to go. You can watch documentaries and a lot of filmmakers do a lot of different things. And that's why I said at the beginning, you can technically put your camera in any position that you want. But I think the best way is to go with this. This is the most traditional, and it's guaranteed that if you have it framed well like this, it's going to connect. Your audience is used to seeing things like that. So they're not going to be wondering, oh, this kid make a mistake. Why are they doing that? Do this asymmetrical composition, person looking across, speech bubble. They're talking right into this negative space right here, okay? All right, so we've got into our space. We've set up our camera. We have our friends sitting in the chair and we've started adjusting our camera, trying to get a shot right. We're doing this, a lot of movement, right? Okay, we like that. Now, if you look at this shot, I have a little bit of headroom. We don't give someone a haircut where we cut off their head like that. We don't do that. I've seen people do interviews where the person's way at the bottom of the screen. And I'm like, what is this a shot of? This composition where there's this much headroom is really only good if you wanted to say something negative. If you wanted to imply that this person has no idea what they're talking about, maybe you just give a ton of space overhead, right? Like they're just empty up here, right? There's no one at home. We want to check, pay attention to headroom. Don't give them a haircut. Don't give them too much space. We're just looking for a small, just enough. Might go a little bit lower, but you know, just enough space, a little bit of space there. They are, if you divided your camera into thirds, so if you had like 1/3 here, 1/3 here, and a third here, right? So if there was in thirds, they're in this third, and then there are 2/3 empty over here, okay? So that's sort of our asymmetry. If you do the same thing with thirds here, that upper third line, their eyes would be right along it, right? So those are things we want to think about. So we've got that, right? You've got your tripod set up, your friend sitting in front of the camera, you've adjusted it, you think you have a good looking shot. The next is your lighting situation. A really good tip is, especially when you're filming in a school or in someone's office, that fluorescent lighting is very common and it is very bad. Fluorescent lighting, depending on the type of bulb, can create a green hue in your shot. It can turn everything kind of gray depending on what the white balance setting is your camera. So it sort of sucks the color out of people's skin, especially. You make people kind of almost look like zombies. But it's bad because it lights everything the same way. So everything gets this very flat lighting, which means your background, your foreground, your midground, everything is lit at the same level. And so it kind of flattens your image. It makes everything just sort of blend together. And you don't want that. You want your interview subject to pop out from the background. You want some contrast. So it's really good, especially if you have lights with you or you're planning on using a window as your primary light source, is to turn off the lights in the room. So turn off the lights in the room and get a sense of what you have. So you might turn off the lights and see that there's actually a window. And if you just moved your interview subject, your stand-in in this case, right, a little bit closer to the window, they'll get a really nice little bit of daylight coming on their window. All right, so you make a move, right? You move your stand-in and your camera setup a little closer to that window. It might be a room where you turn the lights off and it's totally pitch black. So you turn the lights back on and go, okay, we need to set up some lights. So lighting, as far as lighting goes, we'll get into that a little more, but if you do need to get into a little more later, but if you do need to set up a light, the best way is, if this is your camera, and remember I said your interviewer is right next to the camera, put your light right next to the interviewer. That way this person, me, who's sitting here, I'm looking at the interviewer, and then there's a nice light source coming in right here, hitting me from the side, creating a nice little circle of light on my face. There's a few things you can do. If you're lucky enough for you or your school has a softbox, which is a light with a big soft diffusion over it, that's a really great thing to use for an interview. And you don't really need to use a lot of lights beyond that. You know, you could, but if you have a softbox and a well-composed picture, you really don't need to get into any more lighting than that. Like, you're going to be so far ahead of everything else. You're going to be doing great. Now, sometimes I've definitely been in situations where I didn't have a light that was soft like that. We mean soft in that you don't want to shine a direct light into someone's eyes, right? You want to have something. So a softbox would be basically like this semi-transparent material. The light is hitting the material and the light is spreading out across the entire surface, so it's nice and diffused. So sometimes if I don't have a light that can do that, I might just turn it on, but aim it at the ceiling, aim it, somewhere that might bounce back towards the person, or just a little bit of the light, the edges of the light catch the person. But I think that if you don't have a softbox, a really good rule of thumb is just to see if there's a window, if there's some nice daylight coming through a nearby window. That can always, that's a great way, and it's quick. You don't have to worry about setting up stands. So that's a good way to get things moving. Because think about it, like, you just loaded all the skier in. You've been trying to get your composition right, trying to remember, all right, what did Mr. Willis say? He said some space between it. He said asymmetrical. Oh my God, I got to do all these things. And the clock is ticking, and maybe your interviewer is talking to your interview subject, and it's been a while. So you want to move things along. So sometimes in that case, I'm just like, oh, hey, wow, there's a window over there. That's awesome. If I'm outside, I might just put my person under a shady tree, so there's not a lot of direct sunlight coming down on them, and just keep it simple like that. All right, so step 3. So we've got all this going. Now, a few things you want to review before you start getting a further along as far as your composition goes, before you bring your producer in and say, this is the perfect shot. First, double check that your subject isn't really close to a background. Don't interview people up against a wall. If you learn nothing from this entire hour-long lecture, this is the thing. Do not interview someone up against a wall. I noticed that in so many student films I've worked with. A kid goes, oh, we got a bunch of great interviews, and they come in and they're all these people up against a brick wall. The camera's really far away. The composition's like this. And they're like, oh, well, I thought, and I'm thinking, oh my God, how did you make something this bad? So what you want to do is don't interview someone up against the wall. So the first thing is just double check. Do you have a lot of space behind the person being interviewed? A good rule of thumb is at least as much distance between your subject and the camera as is between the background and the subject, right? So if you have your camera and there's a wall here, you would have your subject right in the middle. And if possible, the further away that wall is from them, the better. Another really good tip here is to zoom your camera in all the way. So if you're using like a camcorder, like a big video camera, zoom in your camera as much as you can. If you are using like a DSLR, so something like this, open up the aperture all the way. There's a really cool setting. Sometimes on cameras, you might be able to go to A for aperture, or if you're in video mode, you might be able to adjust that. You can always Google it. If you don't know, if you have a DSLR camera, you don't know how to adjust your aperture, you can always just like type in like, all right, I have a Panasonic GH4. How do I open up the aperture when I'm shooting video? Because every camera is a little bit different in how it does that. Now, the reason why you either want to zoom in all the way or open your aperture all the way is because both of these things helps make the background softer. It helps make the background less in focus. It creates a narrower focal plane. So with a really wide lens, like the one that is on my computer, it's a wide lens, right? It's the same as like a lens on your phone. And that means that really a lot of things are going to be in focus. A zoom lens, a lens that zooms in more, is going to actually have less. So instead of the focal plane being this deep, it's going to be more like that. So the more you zoom in, the narrower the focal plane gets. So for an interview, I worked with this gentleman from CNN who always suggested that. He said, "Hey, if the best you can do to make your interview look good is back up your camera and zoom in." I agree. I agree completely. It's a great trick because when you make the background out of focus, and what I mean is sort of like in portrait mode on your iPhone, where you might see that where the background's out of focus, it's a trick because basically what you're doing is you're making the background out of focus. So you as a filmmaker don't need to worry about what's there, right? We talked about having a background that's meaningful, right? What's this microphone doing here? What's this? You don't want to be distracted. You want your background to reinforce the person who's speaking. And so if you make the background out of focus, you don't have to worry about that, right? You don't have to worry if the background's ugly, if there are like, some like dumb paintings behind the person. Doesn't matter. You make it out of people are looking at is the person being interviewed. So the two ways to do that, again, you can back up your camera and zoom in all the way, or if you have a DSLR that has a lens, so we call it a fast lens, so you kind of have to know a little bit about photography to do this, but if you had a DSLR that opened up really wide to like an aperture below f2, basically f2 or lower, so f2, f1.8, f1.4, f1.2, any of those apertures are really nice to manually set your camera to, and then to get it back properly exposed, you would just speed up your shutter speed or use a neutral density filter, or lower your ISO. So if you're really a camera nerd like me, you know what that means, you can totally do that. And that will give you a soft background. But if you're just a regular person with a camera, I would just back the camera up and zoom it into the maximum zoom. And then you get that same framing. So for a framing like this, with the camera zoomed in all the way, I'm gonna have to have my camera like 12 feet back. I mean, we have to move it back really far and then zoom it all the way in to get this framing. And now you understand why when we were looking for a place to shoot our interview, we wanted a lot of space. Because think about this. All right, we wanted space behind the person, right? Because we don't want them to be up against the wall. And now we're backing our camera up the other way. So here's this wall, here's this person. Now we're backing our camera up so the camera's really far away and we're zooming in all the way. Now you really want a very long room. So that's why I mentioned like the conference room kind of situation where it's very long. But it's nice in those situations, again, have someone in the middle of that room, cameras zoomed in on them. So that's just a really cool, really great little tip. But again, if you can't do that, it's not the end of the world. If you have good audio and you frame up your shot in a nice asymmetrical framing like we talked about, that's going to be really good too. All right, so we talked about, the different composition types, right? So dead center, asymmetrical. We talked about the rule of thirds, and we talked about, leaving space, right? Leaving space behind the person, having space in front of them so the camera can zoom in. So these are things you want to think about, right? You want to think about, okay, I want an asymmetrical composition. I want to use the rule of thirds. So that top third line, the person's eyes are on. They are in 1/3 of the image and the other 2/3 are open, negative space. And they're talking across that. All right, so there you go. You've set up your interview. You are good to go. You are ready to bring your interviewer or your producer in and bring your interviewee in, the subject of your interview, to take a seat and get started with this interview. First question is, well, you know where the interviewee is gonna sit, right? Because you had your stand-in sitting there, you were adjusting the camera, you got this perfect. Question is, where does your interviewer sit? And my suggestion is to, if possible, have them sitting as close to the camera lens as possible. So I might have a camera, let's see, give you a little demo here. Camera might be like right over my shoulder like this. If it's further away, way in the back of the room, that's fine. You can have that further back and you're zoomed in past them, but you still want them to be as close to this lens as possible. And the reason is you don't want the person being interviewed to be looking off like this way while they're being interviewed, because the interviewer is too far over to the side, or they're over here and they're talking to the side of the frame. You don't want them looking right into your camera, because that's not going to work for this type of a documentary. Someone looking into camera is great when they are trying to advocate for a concept and talk right to the audience. But in this case, they're talking to you, the filmmaker. So what we want them to be doing is looking a little bit to the side of the camera. So what I do is, again, I put my interviewer as close to the camera as possible. I will have them move their arms a little bit when they're sitting in a chair. I'll have them shift in their seat. Gesture. I'm like, hey, gesture a little bit for me. Hey, pick up your notes and turn them over, because I'm just checking to make sure that these little moves, that they are leaning forward, leaning back, doing things like this, that they're not getting into the shot, especially if you're really far back and you're zoomed in. You just don't want them kind of crossing into your shot. So you just make a few adjustments there. Usually when it happens, it's a matter of a half an inch, that if they just move a little bit, like a half an inch away from the camera, it looks better. Lost my spot. So, okay, they're sitting down. They're directly next to the camera. If your interviewer is on the right side of the camera, your subject should be on the left side of the frame. So think of it, remember we talked about, if my camera is right here and the interviewer, let's see, make you, so you are the camera operator and I'm sitting over here on this side of the frame, you really want your interviewer to be looking across. So in this situation, your interviewer doesn't sit directly across from the subject. They would sit on this side of the camera. So the person has to look across the frame to look at them. And that way, again, that's how we make that sort of speech bubble effect, where they're speaking towards this negative space. So you want them speaking diagonally across the camera. So you put your interviewer right over here. You don't want them, if you do it on the wrong side in your frame like this, you'll know immediately, because the person's eye line will be like that. And they'll be looking at the edge of the frame, which will be weird. So you should notice that. And then, you got all those things down. It's good to check your exposure, check your lighting. Are you using available light? Did you bring in your own light? The key light, as we call it, is the primary light that is lighting your subject. And so that should be the light that's right next to your interviewer. So we always think of it that way. It goes camera, interviewer, key light. So camera, interviewer, light source. They're always like that. So if I'm the interviewer, the camera is here, I'm right up next to it, there's me, and then there's a light here that's shining this way at my interview subject. I'm here, I'm looking across the camera at them, and the light is next to me, right? So it's camera, interviewer, key light. That's it. Now, whether that's a window that's over here, or a softbox that you brought in, you always want to think about that. Camera, interviewer, key light. The next step, the key light, as we said, that's the main light that's lighting your subject. So you want to think about at this point of, can I eliminate any other distracting light sources? And that's when I talked about, remember before we came into the space, we were turning the lights on and off to see how dark it was. So there, it's really good before you start your interviewer, turn those lights off, turn off other ambient lights, because you don't want something in the background to be really bright, or maybe there's a window that's open in the background that's really overexposed. Go ahead and close the curtains. So like right here, I close these curtains, because if they're open, there would be all this light behind me, and you can see it's like blue and it's bright and it's distracting, and we don't want that for interviews. So when you see parts of your frame that are overexposed, that are really white like that, do what you can to either turn off the light that's hitting them, or close the shades a little bit, because you don't want to have distracting lights. The only light that should be very strong is the key light that's lighting your subject's face. So that light that's next to whatever light source it is, that's next to your interviewer. All right, so now the person has sat down, the light looks good, your composition is great, you're in a space that's pretty quiet, you have some control over it, you don't have students or other people running in and out. The last thing we want to do is get this person mic'd up. You got to get good audio. I said that at the beginning, and it is so important because, again, if our interview doesn't look good, we can work with that. It's a little more work because we have to get a lot more B-roll to cover it up, and that's really hard, but we can work with it. Audio, not so much. You don't get good audio, that's it. You're kind of stuck with the audio that you have. So you bring in your subject, sit them down, and we're going to place a mic on them. Usually for a microphone, use a little lapel mic, so it's a mic that will clip onto a person's shirt. If you don't have a lapel mic, right off camera, you can put a shotgun mic, so a boom mic, that's a long mic like that. You want to get it as close to them as possible. So really right here, it's only about 6 inches above my head to have a microphone right here. So you want to get that microphone very close. Sometimes I don't want it in their eye line, so I might try to, if someone's here, I might have the microphone like right off frame here. So they're looking this way. My microphone's kind of coming from the side or overhead. I just don't want it right in their face. But definitely have some kind of way to mic them. If you don't have a way to mic your subject, you need to stop. You need to have never gone on this interview in the first place because you need to have that. That's one thing. Even shooting even on an iPhone, no matter how like amateur that you're doing this project, you really want to get good audio because that will make all the difference in your film. It's the difference between something being watchable and something being unwatchable. Because if someone can't bear to listen to it, it's just not going to work. So you got to have some kind of microphone. I love to use a shotgun microphone, but lapel mics are great. You can find it cheap. You can go on like Amazon right now, and I don't want to endorse Amazon, but I'm just saying you can go on the internet and you can find like a $30 clip-on microphone that's wired and just plugs into your phone or plugs right into your camera. Get something like that if you don't have a mic because you got to have something. So make sure they're mic'd up. Now, there's a lot of techniques for micing someone, so it looks good. For where you're at, just starting out, like as long as they're mic'd, you did great. Don't worry about it too much. If you do want to go to the next level, what I usually do is I have my microphone unplugged, so the cable's dangling, and I'll offer to the person, and they can drop it down their shirt. And I ask them, can you just drop this mic down your shirt and just pull it out the other side? They pull it out, they hand me that, and I plug it in. And this is another thing. When you're micing someone, you're going to be getting in their face. So you're going to get up right in their personal space. You're like, oh, excuse me, can I put that microphone on you? So a couple things you want to do is first, bring some breath mints. That's a great tip. I learned that from this gentleman who is the cinematographer on this great movie called RoboCop, who I worked with many years ago. Awesome guy. And he said breath mints are the most important piece of equipment he has in his camera bag. So that's awesome, right? I mean, that might make the whole workshop worth it, right? That you just learned that. So have some mints on you. The next thing is the serious one is before you approach someone and start clipping something onto them, tell them what they're doing. This is true in any situation. And again, it goes back to that theme of professionalism that we want to show throughout our shoot, is that before you get within someone's personal space, you should just tell them what you're doing, especially on a shoot. You might be on this shoot, only have 2 people, might just be a camera operator and an interviewer. But when you've got 4 or 5 people, even up to 30 people on a shoot, there's a lot of people moving around. There's lights getting moved, there's cameras getting moved, people are coming and asking questions. So the person in the chair can get really surprised when someone comes out of nowhere into their space and starts clipping something onto them. So what I like to do is say, excuse me, I have to mic you up. Do you mind if I just clip this onto your shirt? And they'll go, oh, no, that's fine. And usually at that point, I'll talk to them. I'll say, is there a spot you think that'll work here? Let's see, you're wearing if they're wearing a jacket, easiest one, because you just clip it right to the lapel. A dress shirt, kind of like this, a button-down shirt, you can, again, just give them the wire and they can drop it down their shirt, clip it on here, and you pull it off the other side and plug it in somewhere. Sometimes if it's like a woman in like a blouse or a dress, it's a lot harder to find a place to clip the mic. And that's where like that external, like a shotgun mic can be really helpful, but they're a little more expensive. But those can be great there because you don't have to worry about where to clip this mic to someone, which can get like awkward and be difficult. So we're always looking at what the person's wearing when they come in for an interview because of that. But if they're wearing something that's difficult, I mean, still, hey, if you can't hide it, if it's just like a couple straps and then like the dress, you know, maybe just clip it onto a strap here. You find somewhere, if it's a very light fitting blouse, you know, I've done times where I've had to clip it lower on someone's shirt, or even like one time, this isn't great, I clipped it onto like the arm of the chair. I think I clipped it on somewhere low. There was nothing to work with. So I was trying to get this microphone as close to this person as possible. But okay, so we mic'd him. We figured it out. This person is mic'd. So the next thing we want to do is check your audio levels. So you can have your interviewer and you as a camera operator says, okay, before we start, I just want to check audio levels. So could you tell the interviewer, Steve, about what'd you have for breakfast? How was your day? Tell me about the drive here, right? Just some like innocuous kind of questions, and they talk and you listen, and you're just making sure that when you're looking at your camera that the levels are like bumping up into red or yellow or getting really high. Or if you have headphones on, please have headphones on. You have headphones on and you're listening and it sounds like really like it's getting too loud. That's something where you might need to either move the microphone a little bit further away from them if for someone who really projects, or turn up or down the sensitivity. Again, it depends on what kind of camera you have for that, but you can change your audio sensitivity on most cameras. And it's something you can look up before the shoot so you know how to do it. So just Google the name of your camera and say, how do I adjust audio levels? And usually there's something a really easy way to do it. But that's really important. We just want to make sure, it's so important with all the stuff going on to not get distracted, because again, by the time you're doing the final stuff with this microphone and you're clipping the mic on someone, you know, I know everyone's there, the interviewer's sitting there, everyone's ready to get this interview started. So you kind of might feel pressure to just get through it and get started, but really take your time with audio. Make sure that it's good. Make sure it's not too quiet, it's not too loud, it's not peaking. Really take your time and then listen also, and make sure you're not hearing other distracting noises. Sometimes it's not until you pop that microphone on them and put your headphones on, you start hearing all kinds of things. And I as a professional, I've dealt with all kinds of surprises there where suddenly there was like audio interference I had to figure out, or there was a cable that wasn't working. So it can be tough, but again, you probably won't have that many issues because you have a very simple camera setup. When we're running with a ton of different pieces of equipment, it's more likely that things can go wrong. So camera operator, like I said, wear headphones. Please wear headphones. It's so important to be able to listen to what's going on. If during the interview you hear a sound like a plane or a truck downshifting, a Mack truck going by and downshifting through 18 gears, someone speaking really loudly outside, or even walks into your interview space, the thing you do is you just say, hold for sound. That's all you do. Just put up your hand and say, hold for sound, sorry. I've let someone finish their thought and found a good place where they pause. And I said, okay, can we hold for sound? Can you go back and repeat what you just said? Sorry, we had, a plane was flying overhead. But that's one of the few times as a camera operator, it's okay to interrupt an interview. You usually don't say cut, you don't do anything, you don't interrupt, you let the interviewer interview. But if the audio goes bad, you got to stop it, because again, then you don't have anything. When I've done interviews and it's just been me, which is really tough, and you have the camera over your shoulder, you have to wear headphones while you're doing the interview, which can be weird and disorienting. I've sometimes just had one little earbud in my ear listening to my audio to make sure that it was good. But that's one of those things where it's really nice, if you're making the movie on your own, to have at least one other person with you for your interview shoots, so that they can be listening to audio, keeping an eye on the camera, while you can focus on conducting the actual interview. The last thing to think about here when we talk about audio is, will you be able to hear the interviewer? So do you want to hear your own questions? Now, my advice, if you're going to make a documentary and you want to make it good and it's going to be short, don't have the interviewer questions in your film. You just want to grab a few select lines. It takes up so much more time to have the person ask a question on camera and then have someone else respond. You see them do that on the news a lot. You don't really want to do that for your film. You want to let the person kind of speak and just select the very best lines that they said. And if you need to connect dots, you add in voiceover later. This is a movie, it's not a news report. So that's one of the major differences. So you want to think about that. Like, okay, if my interviewer isn't going to be, I'm not going to use their audio, I don't need to mic them. Okay, because I've definitely been on shoots where people are trying to mic the interviewer. You don't have to, because you really shouldn't be using their audio. And all that means is make sure the person being interviewed is aware of that. Make sure that they know that the questions will be cut out. So only them speaking will be heard, because that means that they need to restate or rephrase the question in their answer. They can't just say, yeah, I'd say that's true. No, you want them to restate the question. So you want them to say, am I the best person at climbing a tree of all time? Yeah, I'm really good at climbing trees, right? You'd want them, if your question was, are you good at climbing trees? That would be your answer. So that's really important. Like, don't ask yes or no questions. They're going to be so hard to cut in later. Ask open-ended questions during your interview. All right, we're getting there, folks. We're in the final push here. I've got quite a bit, but we're going to get through it here. All right, so we're going to get through it. All right, so what have we learned today? First thing is, you think about all the stuff that had to go in, right? I just spoke for an hour and it was pretty quick, I think, in describing all the things you want to think about when you're setting up an interview. Now imagine you're actually having to do that. You actually have to walk around, you're clipping on the mics, blah, blah, blah. It takes time to set up an interview. I know a lot of people that schedule an interview at 2:30 and they show up at 2:30 and they don't start filming the interview until 3:30. So don't do that, because again, we want the people we're interviewing to feel that we're professional. And if we make them wait around for an hour, they're not going to like that. So usually what I do is, if I'm emailing or on the phone with someone and they say, yeah, I can do an interview at 2:30, come on by then. I'll say, excellent, thank you so much. It takes us about 45 minutes or so to set up. Is it okay if we come a little bit early? And they'll usually say, yeah, sure, no problem. We'll have Mary let you in and it'll be great. All right. So just do that. Ask if it's okay to come a little bit early. Give yourself time in your schedule. Arrive early so you have time to run through the setup. For me, I usually arrive about an hour early. It depends, sometimes an hour to 30 minutes. It depends on how complex it is. For you, I would say, yeah, aim for like, and I know an hour could be a lot, so maybe aim for 45 minutes, especially if it's your first interview that you're doing for your documentary. Give yourself more time to set up. Enter without gear, right? First thing you want to do is greet your subject. You don't want to overwhelm them, shake their hands, talk to them. Then what do we do next? We look for a good place to load in our gear. So is there somewhere out of the way that they might suggest that we can load in our gear? They say, sure, boom, we're loading our gear in. The producer or interviewer, they should start chatting with them while you, your camera crew, or yourself starts to load in gear. And even if it's just a two-person team, that's fine, right? One person takes the interview subject aside to talk to them. Someone else is loading in gear because you're trying to build a relationship right off the bat, putting your subject at ease, okay? So that's like, those are all the things that we had to do to get to this point where this interview is going. So give yourself time to get set up. Now, once the interview is underway, just some like a few little tips here is, first, be a good active listener. Nod your head, smile, sometimes go, that's interesting. And especially if it's soft and it's quick and it's a little bit, so it doesn't disrupt the audio that you're getting. That's good. Sometimes it can be nice to ask really short but effective follow-up questions like, oh, why? So it's like really short, right? It was 2 words, but like I leaned in, I turned my head, I raised my eyebrows. I said, oh, why is that? Right? Because that little thing, it's like, I want it to be quick and just get it in there quickly to keep them going and let them know that I'm listening and I care, because I'm trying to keep this interpersonal connection going. I might say something like, oh, wow, how'd that make you feel? Right? So who, what, where, why, how? What were you thinking at that moment? Another one that a friend of mine loves to do, my buddy over at CNN, he loves what he calls a pregnant pause, where someone says something and instead of just asking your next question immediately, pause for a minute. Because people hate silence. So sometimes if they said something really interesting, before you just jump to your next question, just pause. And just let it go a little bit longer, a little bit into an awkward place. And usually someone might start saying something. It's a more advanced technique, but you could use it right. And then remember, yes, you want information, but for your film to be powerful, your interview needs to have personal elements, or you need at least some interview that has some personal stories in it, because you might end up having in a short film one personal story that helps articulate a concept in your film. So asking those who, what, where, why, how, how'd you feel? What did you think? What would you have done differently if you did it again? Right? More personal, right? They're not just asking for the facts, not just tell me what happened, tell me about this piece of information. Ask them things that are more personal and more emotional, because documentaries we think of as very intellectual, but they're actually very emotional. And that's going to make your film be stronger. So you spent all this time trying to, I talked about trying to be a professional, trying to build a good personal connection. Now you're in the interview, you want to try and connect with them, and you want to ask them little questions that give them permission to speak on a more personal level about this topic, about this issue. Sometimes I've even gone as far as to ask them a personal story. Like, do you have a personal story or an anecdote about that you could share that might help articulate an idea? Because that could really help our film be more engaging. And some might go, oh, that's a tough one. Let me think about that. I think that sometimes that's one of those ones. I don't usually like to send questions in advance, because then people get too scripted when we show up. But that is one where I might mention to someone, well, when we get there, we might ask you for a personal story or some anecdotal stories about your experiences. So you might want to think about some things that you might want to share. That could help someone, because some people have a tough time with that on the spot. All right, so when we're finishing up, key things for our interview. When your interview is complete, ask them if there's anything else that they would like to add. That is so important. You go through maybe 10, 12, 15 questions, open-ended questions. They were great. You asked awesome follow-up questions. It ended up being like 25 questions you asked total. You were so engaged. You weren't staring at your script the whole time. You were looking at them. You did a great job. Interview's over. Don't just walk away. Be like, thank you for your time. Is there anything else that you'd like to add? That's a huge thing to do. Sometimes you get your best moments out of that. I mean, I've sometimes got my best moments after we turn off the camera, because the person's only got more relaxed. So try at the end of the interview to take the energy down a bit, relax, show them that you're interested, and try and just speak a little more off the cuff with them, and you'd be surprised what you get. Finally, when you're leaving the set, after you've wrapped up your gear, we're getting close to the end, I told you, do it. I call it dummy check. It's not super appropriate, I know, but the dummy check is don't be a dum-dum. You want to walk through the space and be sure you have not left anything behind. I just did it 2 days ago on a shoot. I got a call. I realized I left a remote control for my drone on a location. I left my Leatherman there. I left an extension cord there. We call it a stinger. Come on, So walk through. You got everything in the car, everything in the bus. Just do a walk through the space, look around. You'll find like someone left a hat, someone left a water bottle. Do that dummy check. Don't leave things behind. That always sucks, because then you have to go back for it, which is just so difficult and can be a real pain. All right, so that's it. So in the last 2 minutes I have here, I just want to really quickly, once again, just review the key points. I promised that I would at the beginning. And so, like I said, first one is our tech scout, right? When we walk in, we want to be thinking about the technicals, right? Where we plug in power, where's a good place to shoot, what kind of light sources do we have? So you're thinking about those technical things. Is there any sound interference that we can deal with? Is there an air conditioning unit on? So it's technical. It's like, all right, this is the tech scout. I got to find a place that works on the technical levels for me. Set up your camera and your tripod first. Get those set up and figure out your shot. Because once you have that figured out, you can start working with lighting, working with other elements, but figure out what that shot is, because that also is something where people might want to weigh in and go, I don't like this shot. I do like this shot. I don't like the background. People start wanting to move things around. So get that set up, because that lets everyone go to work. When everyone can see what the shot is going to be, then everyone can get to work on making it look good. When you're setting up your shot, use a stand-in. Don't use the person who's going to be interviewed. That can make them very nervous or impatient. So have a friend, gets the best job in the world. They get to sit in that chair while you set focus, while you zoom in, while you start moving lights around them. So they get a great job there. So if you have an extra person, do that. Next, remember this one: camera, interviewer, key light, right? So wherever you set up your camera, directly next to your camera is your interviewer. Next to your interviewer is your key light, shining across this space onto our interview subject. Almost there, folks. Final little bit here. Okay, we just hit, but we started a minute late, so we're gonna go a minute over. All right, next one, asymmetrical composition, right? Remember this asymmetrical composition. We don't want someone dead center. We don't want them turned off to the side. You want them just like that. You have this negative space over here for that speaking bubble. Pay attention to what is in your shot. Once you have this set up like this, remember, it can be helpful to keep the background out of focus. The further away it is, the better. A long room is the best for achieving that, or going outside. Notice the lighting. So turn off fluorescent light sources or other light sources that could be overexposing or just making the background bright, right? It's nice to have the background a little bit darker than the foreground. So if you can achieve that, that's really cool. While an interview is going on, remember, if you're the interviewer, nod your head, show that you're listening, squeeze in little comments like, oh, that's interesting. Could you tell me more about that? Those are follow-up questions, right? Shows you're engaged, so that you're interested in what they're talking about. And finally, when you leave, once again, don't leave your gear behind, double check, okay? So those are the steps, right? If there was anything, I would say make sure you have good audio. Use this asymmetrical framing. Don't cut someone off, but put them right here. Don't film someone up against a wall. I think those are the key ones. It's like good audio. Don't film someone up against the wall. Use that asymmetrical framing. I mean, if you do those things and you don't have any fluorescent lights on, so 4 things: audio, don't be up against a wall, asymmetrical composition, and no fluorescent lights. You do those 4 things, your video will be good enough. We can work with that. Doesn't have to be amazing, but that's going to be good. I hope this wasn't too much information. I appreciate those who were able to come for this, and those who will be watching this later. Thank you for watching. I hope this was helpful. And if you'd like, maybe we'll be able to send people who signed up for this some of like my list of some of these key points. But thank you so much. Really appreciated you being here. All right, take it easy, guys. Thanks for joining me.